and especially those that are joining us for the very first time. We're glad you're here. We hope to have you back. We meet here every Friday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So again, for those first-time visitors, we are continuing to elevate the voice of the male adoptee. And we've had 2 male adoptees the last 2 weeks, and we're having our 3rd one this evening, which some of you already know, Vin Adoptee. And Vin is going to share his adoption experience as an intercountry, interracial, gay male adoptee. So welcome, Vin, from Down Under. We're glad to have you.
Thank you very, very, very much for having me. And I just want to start off by thanking everyone for coming along and being here. And like Pam said, you know, today marks 19 years. And so I just wanted to pay respects to that. Whoever thought 19 years later I was doing something like this, you know, I was just a little kid. So, you know, I just wanted to pay respects for that. And I also want to thank Pam, Jen, and Marcie for having me on this. It's such an honor to be here and to do this chat with you all. So I'm gonna open with a paragraph from my book that I'm writing. It's been a long time in the making. I'm the world's biggest procrastinator, and you know, I started a 6-month course and it took me 4 years to do. So I eventually got around to finishing it. So, but I'll eventually get around to finishing my book. But I just want to start off with this paragraph. As I looked up into the night sky, all I saw was black. Most nights when I looked up, I see the stars shining so brightly, but tonight all I saw was black. As I looked down from the sky, it went in slow motion. As my eyes caught the top of my swing, I could imagine a rope with a noose hanging from it, and I could see myself freely hanging, dangling in midair. Tears started to fill my eyes and slowly roll down my face, and I didn't even know why. It hasn't been that long since I last thought of ending it all. I can be so paranoid about trusting anyone. I don't even trust myself sometimes. I wake up from nightmares all the time, and I don't even want to sleep these days because the nightmares seem so real. We all have insecurities, phobias, and most of us are suffering from something. However, we are warriors and we're survivors, all of us. I believe life is about tension and growth, having the ability to change our mindset, not just once. Life is forever changing and our mindset is forever changing. Adoptees aren't the only people that have a story. Everyone has a story. Life is a quest. I believe we are all on our quest to find our true self, whatever that may be. I'm going to share a story with you that has a lot to do with adoption and the adoption community before I take you back to the beginning. A year ago, I was in a pretty dark place. I felt like I had lost my purpose. I felt like it was taken away from me. People told bits and pieces of my story in their words and twisted it around completely and used my past and my struggles against me. And I felt like I had no way out. I felt like I was trapped, and the only thought I turned to was the thought of suicide. I did attempt to kill myself that day. A few weeks later, I was sitting there and I was really depressed. So I came up with an idea. I said to myself, I'm giving myself 500 days. I was so depressed and I felt like I didn't have anything left in my life to give or do. And so I said 500 days. I'm giving myself 500 days. And if nothing has changed and my life hasn't changed in 500 days, I'm going to commit suicide. So after I started this little quest, it was a week after I had met 2 friends and they invited me to do a men's walking group and to film their quest and just sort of talk about mental health and men's issues and everything like that. And I began to love it and I began to thrive. A few weeks after that, and this is quite funny because in the same week, I was robbed and assaulted twice. My partner of 10 years, we parted. I was in a car accident and my dad was in hospital. So that all happened in the space of a week. And then a couple of weeks after that, I started meeting new friends. I signed up to a course and I was doing really good and I was really positive about life. And I changed my mindset on the 500-day meaning. I began being really inspired and I started actually living. And so my purpose to the 500 days changed. So instead of at the end of the 500 days, I'm going to commit suicide, I changed that meaning. I then started taking video footage once a week of how my life changed in 500 days. So at the end of the 500 days, I'm going to put a documentary together and just show you all how much someone can change their life in 500 days. So I'm going to take you back to the beginning of my story. So I'm an adoptee, as you all know. I'm an intercountry adoptee, and I was born in India, and I was given up 2 weeks after I was born, to an orphanage. And I was in the orphanage for 10 months of my life, of the first 10 months of my life. And as you might all know, I have a connection to Sharu Brearley, who made the movie Lion. And not much of a connection, but we came across from India together. And I'm just going to show you all this photo, and I've circled him and I and the other kids. And so there's not much of a connection there, but we shared a journey together, that journey of coming across from India together. So I'm not going to go too much into detail about the orphanage, but in India, I'm sure you can all imagine that it was one of the poorest parts of India, and it was in the slums of India. And so it wasn't very good. And there was a lot of abuse going on in the orphanage. But I was adopted out to Australia, and I spent my childhood being an actual kid. I played in the dirt, I rode bicycles, I played with the kids in the street. It was such a fantastic childhood, and one that I'm pretty proud of, because if I think to kids these days, they have such a different childhood, growing up in this day and age. So my childhood was fantastic, and my adoptive family, who I just normally say my family, I was very blessed and very lucky to have such a supportive adoptive family, and not all adoptees can say that. And I used to apologize for that, because a lot of adoptees didn't have a positive adoption story, but I've stopped apologizing for that, because I shouldn't have to. So I had a great childhood, my teen years, and my high school experience. That was very different. That was when my life changed a lot. Sorry for the squeaky. My mum said that every day before school, she'd always know that I was awake in the house, because I'd sing at the top of my lungs whenever I got up. And she said one of the saddest days for her as a parent was that when I got to high school, I stopped singing and I became depressed, and I went into myself, because I was getting bullied, and there was a lot of racism, there was a lot of sexual abuse, there was things that you could never imagine or ever want your child to go through that I experienced. And as a result, I had a lot of difficulties concentrating in school, and there was a lot of it was criminal stuff that happened to me, but the school swept it under the rug, and I didn't tell anyone about the sexual abuse until much later on in life. Being a young child, you get scared at threats that bullies make. So I was very, very scared not to say anything for many, many, many years. So I got kicked out of high school. The school asked me to leave because they couldn't control the bullying, and so I left. So then that led to going into a program for troubled teens, and I did that. And then after that, I tried to go back into the normal, I suppose, schooling thing, and I didn't do well. I was popular for the first time, and that can do some funny things to you. And I was still a young kid, and I met a girl, and I fell in love and ran away from home because I didn't want rules, and the girl that I fell in love with didn't have a family that followed rules at all, and that appealed to me as a young kid. And so I ran away from home, and I very quickly learned that having rules is definitely one of the biggest things that parents could teach kids. But I didn't want a bar of it because, what kid wants rules? And, what took place over the next several months was a lot of abuse, a lot of sexual abuse, and a lot of things that, again, I don't know how I survived, but it was horrible, horrible things. So I eventually got out of that, and that leads me to my 20s. That was that was the time when I had a mental breakdown, and everything from my past came back to haunt me. I had never spoken about my sexual abuse in high school. I had never spoken about the time that I ran away from home to anyone. And I had a relationship with my family again for the first time. I came out as gay when I was about 16, 17. So that was I struggled with that quite a lot because I had a few girlfriends, but I always knew that was something wasn't right, and I did struggle with that. But when I told my parents that I was gay, I was petrified that they wouldn't accept me for that. But my mum just smiled at me and said, "Oh, thank goodness." And I'm like, "Thank goodness? What do you mean?" And she goes, "Oh, we've known for a while." And I'm like, "Oh, well, you could have told me." And so, it was a relief to know that, one, they knew, and two, that it was almost it was a positive thing. And, and my dad, he's a real man's man, and, a very, just a very typical stereotyped male, and I didn't know how he was going to react, but he turned to me and he said, "Well, you're still my son, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well," and he gave me a hug and he said, "That's all that matters." And, I didn't cry when he did that, but I know when I left him, I burst out in tears because that was just one of the best reactions that, anyone could ever have. And I'm so fortunate that was my coming out story. I know a lot of other people aren't as fortunate as that. But now my mum is a LGBTIQA advocate, and she organizes a lot of events and stuff, and so that's absolutely amazing. And I found out the other day that my dad was at work, and he was talking about Wear It Purple Day to a group of blokes around at a toolbox meeting. And, they all came out and started sharing stories about all their friends that they knew were gay and everything. And that almost made me cry because it's, if you knew my dad, he's a gentle giant, and it's just so inspiring to me that my dad could do that, and that he's sharing that positivity and the openness about being gay and being diversities, I suppose, is the word I'm looking for, to a bunch of blokes, which is amazing. 10, 20 years ago, that was unheard of. So that really had a really impact on me. It was a really good feeling. So that was my coming out story. But back to me being in my 20s, this was a predominant time for me because I did have my mental breakdown, and I did have my family there to support me. But it was the first time I let out about 10 to 12 years of rage of the abuse of not just physical and mental abuse, of sexual abuse. And I will add that absolutely none of that came from my adoptive family at all. It was from other people that I had met along my journey. So it was a crucial time for me because it was like this lid had come off this bottle and exploded, and it was, I suppose, inspiring, but at the same time terrible and tragic and horrible. And I had let it all out, and it felt great. So in my 20s, I for that space of 10 years, I worked on myself, and I was able to put some things behind me. Some things I don't, and some things I'll carry forever. But it doesn't define who I am either. My past doesn't and will never define who I am. And so I did a lot of work on myself with my past traumas. And it's funny because a lot of people, when they go through their life, before their 30s, they sometimes think about adoption, but then sometimes don't. And, it's kind of like a roller coaster of a thought, really. But for me, it never really played a part for me. I didn't really think about my birth parents when I was from, say, the age of 10 to about 25. That didn't really play a big part at all. Sure, I'd walk past an Indian in the street, and the thought would cross my mind, I wonder if my parents look like that, or I wonder if that's where I get my looks from. But it was never a concrete thought in my mind. So being in my 20s, I dealt with a lot of my past struggles. And then it got to my 30s, and on my 30th birthday, my mum turned to me and she said, "So, what's going to be your next chapter in life?" And I said, I think I want to look into my adoption. And so I got a counselor that specialized in adoption, and we started talking adoption. And she said, "Have you tried looking online for things about adoption?" And I'd been on Facebook for quite a few years, and it never even occurred to me till then to look for adoption stuff. And so I went online and I looked at adoption stuff, and I found adoption stuff. Although my experience in the adoption community is very different. I was very naive about adoption. I was very much, and most of you that know me know that I hate the term "in the fog." I think the reason why I hate the term "in the fog" is because, and I know hate's a strong word, but I actually hate that term. It's another label. And as adoptees, we already face so many labels that are put on us. And that was just another label for me. And I understand that it has a huge significance. And because there's a lot of things that I wasn't aware of when I first came into the adoption community online. And I'll admit that I was very naive. I was very much stuck in the thought of, I'm a happy adoptee. My adoption was great. My experience as an adoptee wasn't perfect, and I had my issues, but I didn't want people to turn to me and say, you're effed up because of your adoption. And a lot of people who I came across didn't understand my past. And so the things that I've dealt with in my past weren't adoption related. It was trauma related to other issues that I had had in my past. And it wasn't until I was 30, when I looked into my adoption, I started learning the vocabulary and the right language to use when it came to talking about adoption. And I'll admit it took me quite a while. And I made mistakes. I did. But I'm only human. And we evolve, like I said at the start, we evolve as humans, and our thought processes change. And we constantly grow, and opinions change. And my opinion has changed quite a few times. There was things that I agreed with, and there was things that I didn't agree with. But I find myself now, those things that I agreed with and didn't agree with, they've changed over time. And, the adoption community, it's every adoption group out there helps someone. Some aren't for everyone. But the thing that I've learned about the adoption community online is that it's not a competition. It's a marathon. It's not a race. You'll find your tribe, and sometimes some of the people in your tribe will be your tribe, and some members of the tribe will leave, and you'll make new ones. It's all a massive learning curve. And that's what I've discovered in the adoption community online, is that it's a chance to grow, not just your opinions or what you learn, but everything. And it's okay to disagree. We're human. We all think differently, and we all have had our own path that we've gone down. And it's our experiences and our trauma. A word that I've heard quite often, especially lately, is trauma bonding. I think as adoptees, we trauma bond very quickly. And that was definitely a lot of connections that I've experienced with, especially with other adoptees. We were able to trauma bond. But then with some adoptees that I've connected with, we've moved past talking about adoption, and we were able to have a friendship that was beyond adoption. And, that's really, really important to be able to do that, to have a friendship, not just based on adoption and our experiences as an adoptee, but to know all the things about them. And that's what makes us human. It's not the labels that are put on us, because if you stick to the labels that people put on you, then you're limiting yourself, and you're limiting your capacity to what those labels are. So, we all have different experiences, and no one has the right to judge you on those experiences, because we're all different. And no one's experiences are worse or greater or less than anyone else's. It's just different. We all come from different paths, and we all have different experiences. And going back to the fog, I think that's where there's different layers of the fog, in my opinion. I think there's different layers of the fog, and I think people everyone is at a different stage of the fog. And do we ever really come out of the fog? I don't know, you know, and who determines when we're out of the fog? You know, that's a really difficult thing to determine, because who has the qualification to turn around and say, oh, okay, you're out of the fog, we can treat you like this. But then on the flip side of that, you know, there's some people that turn around and say, well, you're in the fog, we're going to treat you like this. You know, who classifies that? You know, so I suppose there are many versions of the fog, and I think the fog is much greater than just adoption. I think it represents life in general. You know, when it comes to trauma, there's different things that we learn on how to cope with that. You know, one of my biggest coping mechanisms throughout my life has always been music. Music has been one of my biggest coping mechanisms. I've always had a song for every single emotion, and music sometimes, a lot of the times, represents emotions that I can't express. You know, it's like tears. Tears, when we burst out into tears, they're the emotions and the words that we can't speak. And, you know, so there's always been a song for every emotion. And with anyone who I connect with, there's always been a song that is connected to me and that person. So, you know, the adoption community is such a wide, diverse, complex, toxic, interesting world full of so many different people and different experiences, and we need to learn to take away from the negatives and turn them into positives. You know, we're all human, and we all make mistakes. And I think one of the biggest things that I've done is use my mistakes as a tool. You know, I'm going to use the Game of Thrones quote here. Jon Snow says to Davos, Sir Davos, you know, I failed. And Sir Davos says to Jon Snow, good, go fail again. And I think that's I love that quote, because just because you failed doesn't mean that you should give up, you know. And I've failed so many times in my life, and I constantly am aware of my failures. I hate that word, I can never pronounce it properly. But I always fail. But one of my biggest achievements in my life is that I've gotten back up, and I've continued no matter what the challenge I had faced was, you know. But I've used all those knockbacks, and I would sit there and I'd beat on myself, and I'd tell myself how worthless I am and how I can't do anything and how I'll never amount to anything or much. But then I will go and listen to a song or put my earphones in and sing at the top of my lungs so no one else can hear me, and my dog just walks out of the room. And I do that often, and I do that every single day, because that's how I express my emotions, how I express my anger, how, you know, if something goes wrong during the day, at night, just before I go to bed, I put my headphones in and, you know, turn on Share and sing at the top of my lungs, and it gets all that rage and everything out. And I don't care what I sound like, and I'm just glad I have no neighbors, because, oh my God, I feel sorry for them. So it's great, you know. It would be 5, 6 in the morning, and if my dad ever walks past my house, he'll hear me singing, so I apologize to them. But I'm never going to win Idol, but who cares? I'm not doing it for that. But it just helps me be in such a positive mind state, you know. And And I believe that music is such a good thing for that. You know, you can, when I'm depressed, I sit there and I listen to depressing music because it helps me with my depression. You know, sure, it also helps me think of ways on how I can die, but you know, Bob Sinclair Love Generation comes on and it gives me an outburst of how much I can live, you know. So it changes my mindset constantly. So it's always great to be able to change your perspective, and that's the best thing about life. You're constantly changing your perspective, and when I get faced with challenges, I like to be challenged because it helps me grow as a person. And I haven't always done it in a good way, but I'm still learning, and I'm probably the first person to admit that I stuff up every now and then. But, you know, I'm only human. So I just want to sort of start closing up and talk about virtues. I have a lot of virtues and a lot of mantras that I go by, and one of my biggest ones is kindness. I've always been kind, and I know there's different versions of people. You sometimes see different versions of people, and I've at one stage of my life many years ago, I was a very fake person, and I was like a chameleon because everyone I meet, I wanted to fit in, and so my personality would change. And I think that's a common thing with adoptees. We change to match the personalities of the people we hang around, and we're not true to ourselves, because if people knew who we really were, then they wouldn't like us. And so I was fake for many years, and it wasn't until, you know, my 20s and my 30s where, well, it was really my 30s where I thought, you know what, stuff the rest of the world, I'm going to be me, and whoever doesn't accept me for me, because I have enough struggles with accepting me for me. So I started accepting me for me, and I became 110% me. And I embraced being brown. I embraced being gay. I embraced absolutely 110% of who I am. And kindness is one of them. One of the things that I was always brought up to be. It doesn't matter where people have come from in life. No one is better off than anyone. Social status doesn't define anyone. You know, at the end of the day, we all come from a different path in life. Another virtue for me is courage. You know, it takes courage to get up every day, and a lot of people might not see that, but everyone that has struggled in life knows that it takes courage to get up every day. It takes courage to do anything in life, and honor, to do things with honor. You know, that's a very big one. You know, so these, you know, I'm not going to list all my virtues because I have quite a few and I don't want to bore you, but it's great to sort of have a mantra to live by. And, you know, those are the things that I use my past mistakes and my failures to try and turn them all into such a positive thing, and to help whoever I can. And again, it's not about popularity. It's not about a competition. It's about you, and everything that you do reflects on who you are as a person. And, you know, to be a nice, kind person doesn't take effort. To hold on to anger, to hold on to things that our past have traumatized us from, it takes its toll, and we have to learn to find a way through that and turn it into a positive. And it's easier said than done. It really is, but it's not impossible. So, you know, we all have different versions of ourselves, but one of the biggest things that I strive within myself is to be absolutely 110% authentic, because there's only one you, and only you know your story and your struggles that you've gone through. So don't ever let anyone take that away from you, because you don't have to justify yourself to anyone, because you know yourself. And be proud of yourself. Have the courage to be proud and stand up for what you believe in. And not everyone may agree with you, but that's okay. Like I said, it's not a competition and it's not a popularity contest. But, you know, at the same time, neither is life. The only person, I think, for me, the only person that I've always been in competition with is myself. And again, I'm going to use that thing that I said before, you know, about my life. It's not a race, it's a marathon. So like I said before, one of my greatest achievements in life is that I'm a survivor. We're all survivors and we're all warriors. So be a warrior and be kind, because that's one of the best things that you can be. And most of you know, if you're on my Facebook, I use so many emojis, it's just not funny. And there's so many hearts and love hearts everywhere. And it's because when you put out positivity in the world, I like to think that it comes back. And sometimes it doesn't always come back, but that's okay. Don't not put love hearts and emojis, you know, use emojis, because sometimes it just makes you laugh and smile. And I'm sure a lot of you will think, oh God, Vin and his bloody emojis, but you know what? That's just me. And I'm proud of that, and it makes me happy. And I hope that it makes everyone else happy too. So if you get sick of my emojis, just send me a, you know, middle finger emoji. I like emojis. So that sort of concludes my chat. But thank you so much for listening and for being here. And again, it was such a massive honor to be able to be here and chat to you all. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Vin, and we really appreciate you tonight. Thank you for sharing. It's great. We're going to take this time now to open it up to your questions, and I know that we have plenty of them out there. So who would like to I'll start.